The Middle East on the brink, Israeli mourning and anger with a vow of never again. At the same time, Gazan civilians are fleeing for their lives. I'm Mercedes Stephenson. The West Block begins now. Israel prepares to move in on Hamas, fears about a wider war. And in Gaza, civilians trapped with nowhere to go. 1 week after the unthinkable atrocities inflicted by Hamas against Israeli civilians, the country is ready for war. Earlier today, I spoke with IDF spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner. He revealed that the Israeli Special Forces have been conducting raids across the border that are still going on, and that they believe 126 people have been taken hostage. Those secret special operations raids are continuing.
There are special raids that are ongoing in close proximity of the perimeter. Indeed, they are targeted in trying to locate bodies, perhaps of victims. There are still people that are unaccounted for as a result of the massacre.
As concern grows about the possibility of a northern front opening in the war, the Lieutenant Colonel also had a warning for Hezbollah.
There have been skirmishes, including fatalities. Even this morning, as an anti-tank guided missiles have been fired at Israel and with fatalities this morning. So Hezbollah is definitely heating up the situation. I would recommend that Hezbollah look very closely how we are dismantling Hamas's government, leadership, and operational capabilities, and they should be very cautious about crossing that threshold.
How is Israel preparing for the ground offensive and the possibility of a wider regional war? Joining me now is Reserve Brigadier General Amir Avivi, chairman of the Israel Defense and Security Forum. He's a former IDF deputy commander of the Gaza division. Thank you so much for joining us today, General.
You're welcome.
I know that Israel has been through tremendous trauma and is now preparing for a response. Can you take us through how the Israeli military is preparing to respond to these attacks from Hamas?
Well, there is a government decision that we have to really achieve an unconditional surrender of Hamas in the Gaza Strip and strip Hamas completely from its capabilities and ability to govern the Gaza Strip. And for this, we're preparing for a ground operation. We have amassed all our forces that are relevant in the south. And in the coming days, we see a ground operation in Gaza.
Can you tell me what intelligence Israel has or believes in terms of what Hamas's capabilities might be? Because I know there's been a tremendous effort to try to gather more information. That intelligence before obviously wasn't accurate. What do you expect Israeli soldiers are going to encounter?
Hamas is not a terror organization, it's a terror army. They're equipped with everything an army has, drones, anti-tank missiles, IEDs, grenades, machine guns, tunnels, cyber. They have many capabilities. They have prepared the Gaza Strip as a fortress full of tunnels and bunkers and positions, and we'll have to maneuver very aggressively with a lot of Air Force assistance and artillery and everything you need to do in war in order to secure soldiers and manage to do the missions with minimum casualties.
You were the former deputy commander for the Gaza division, so I know it's a place that you know very well. What would you anticipate the possible time frame is once Israeli troops start to move to take Gaza?
So when you go on offensive, there's two stages. The first stage is the maneuver, which you usually do to centers of gravity, which the army needs to define where it wants to maneuver. And after you reach these points and deal with them, then really the hard part comes, and this is really cleaning the whole Gaza Strip from a terror presence, destroying all terrorist infrastructure, tunnels, rocket launchers, bunkers, headquarters. I can go for an hour or two talking about missions. This takes months. It's not a short operation. And at the end of the day, the Gaza Strip needs to be a completely civilian area, no terror infrastructure at all. in the Gaza Strip in the future.
Would the Israeli military have the ability to hold the Gaza Strip if the Israeli government decided that they wanted to annex it?
We have the ability and we have the needs. The IDF will have to maintain in the future complete freedom of operation in the whole Gaza Strip, just as we do in Judea and Samaria. We don't rule in everyday life in Jenin or in Nablus, but if there is a terror cell or terror infrastructure, then we go in, we apprehend, and we go out. And this is something we need to do also in Gaza if we want to really provide security to the citizens of the South who are not going to go back to their homes if we don't assure them that we can secure them.
What role do you believe that Iran has played in the build-up to these attacks and in the decisions about whether or not Hezbollah gets involved? I know there's been border skirmishes. We just heard from the IDF Lieutenant Colonel who talked about fatalities as a result of that. But how involved do you think Iran is in the actual decision-making of what will play out?
It's all Iran. This is a war against Iran. Hamas and Hezbollah are Iranian militias, funded by Iran, equipped by Iran, guided by Iran, and Iran gives the orders. And Hamas cannot go to such an offensive war without Iranian consent. And I think that the Iranian plan was to disrupt the buildup of a Western Israeli Sunni coalition, as was about to happen through the normalization between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the whole Sunni world. Basically an alliance that was being built to counter the Russian, Iranian, Chinese front.
Does Israel have the ability to, and I know I've spoken with Israeli government sources who have said, you're assuming that there very well could be a multi-front war. You're hoping that there's not. I know in 2006 it was difficult, and of course it's difficult to hold more than one front at a time. Do you think the Israeli military is prepared to fight Hamas and Hezbollah at the same time?
We are in full readiness. We have mobilized the whole army and the whole country. We are ready as much as a country can be ready. Everything is ready. All our soldiers are trained, equipped, and already deployed along the borders. On top of that, the U.S. that understands that this is a global war. This is not about Israel. This is about the West. This is about the Russian-Iranian front that is challenging the West, and this is why the U.S. is bringing warships and getting involved and threatening Iran and the Hezbollah not to intervene, and even showing willingness to fight. This is a global war. Israel is just the catalyst of something much, much bigger, and we'll be ready. I think I'm not sure it's in the interest of Iran to really have Hezbollah involved, because then they will be defenseless. They count on Hezbollah to really defend them. Without Hezbollah, Iran will be exposed, and they know that.
You mentioned everyone's been talking about Iran, but in addition to that, China and Russia. Can you tell us a bit about the role that you believe those two countries are playing in this?
Well, I think that talking about the Russian-Ukrainian war and the sanctions, the harsh sanctions that have been imposed on Russia and Iran, and rightly so, this created a dynamic that you see the East getting closer and closer together. Russia, Iran, North Korea, all these countries have been very dependent on China, and they're trying to build their own ecosystem. So the East and the South are building a force that is challenging the West. And I think that the West, especially the US, that it leads the West, are starting to understand that this is a huge challenge that needs some kind of alliance to balance the globe and stabilize the Middle East and other regions. And this is what we're seeing.
The hostages are obviously a huge consideration in all of this and very difficult to find. Can you tell us how the Israeli military is calculating, how do you carry out these operations, which could be devastating in an area where your own citizens may be being held?
We must say that it's not only Israeli citizens. There are many American citizens, many European citizens, And I think their best chance is a IDF offensive and us trying to really maneuver and find them and liberate them.
Do you think the IDF might provide any humanitarian relief in this operation to the civilians of Gaza?
Well, we're asking the civilians of Gaza to move south. In the south of Gaza, they'll be safer. We don't want Palestinian civilians in a war zone involved. We try to minimize casualties. The Hamas is doing everything it can to prevent them from moving south. It wants them as human shields. He wants civilians to die so he can blame Israel. So we are really doing everything we can to tell the civilians to go south. And if we regain control of Gaza, of course, we'll also deal with the relief and all humanitarian aspects in this area.
General, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Up next, trapped with no way out as Israeli forces are preparing to close in. The desperate humanitarian situation in Gaza. According to the United Nations, an estimated 1 million people have been displaced in Gaza this week as basic necessities like food, fuel, and drinking water run out after Israel's complete siege of the area. We wanted to give you an idea of just how small this piece of land is where this extensive military campaign is expected to take place. For context, if you took Gaza, seen here in red, it would cover an area roughly the size of the island of Montreal. And for our Western viewers, it would cover a narrow strip the length of the city of Calgary. So what can be done for the civilians who are trapped in this tiny area? Joining me now to discuss this is Zaha Hassan, a human rights lawyer. She was the legal advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team during their bid for UN membership. Zaha, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin with what the situation is in Gaza. There are not a lot of Western journalists there, so the footage that we're getting out is very sporadic. We're not able to get a lot of reporting. I know that you are in touch with many contacts. Can you describe the situation for us?
Yes, thank you again for having me. This is a very somber day. Look, Gaza is a strip of land, as you said, a very small strip of land where 2.3 million people, most of whom are refugees or descendants of refugees from 1948 when Israel was established, and it forced out 3/4 of the Palestinian population from what became the state of Israel. So these folks have been sitting there for 75 years, and their children and grandchildren now and great-grandchildren. And since 1967, they've been living under a very strict Israeli occupation that has, since the last 16 years, become a complete blockade and siege of the strip after Hamas, the resistance movement, took over the strip that year. And their movements are completely controlled by Israel from birth to death. Israel controls everything, whether someone gets a birth certificate, a death certificate, an ID number as a resident of Gaza. All this is controlled by Israel. And the situation has been completely suffocating for the economy. As you might imagine, if there is a blockade, there's very difficult economic development that can happen in the strip. And so this is the context in which we're at this moment now, where we have the Hamas resistance movement attacking Israel on October 7th, in a very brutal and despicable way, involving the deaths of 1,300 Israelis. And now we're in this moment where Israel is lashing back at Hamas, but also the civilian population of Gaza, who have no ability to take care of themselves because they are in the strip and they're dependent on international aid, which is now leaving the strip because the UN is getting out of the way so that they can protect their own staff. So for me right now, this idea that 1.1 million Palestinians have been told that they should evacuate to the southern part of Gaza is just crazy, because this is an area of land where it's already blockaded. There's nowhere to go. Shelters are overrun. the Palestinians that are, there's now over 2,300 that have been killed, almost 10,000 people that have been wounded in hospitals. There's only 2,500 beds, hospital beds in all of Gaza. And the biggest hospital is in the north, where people are being told to evacuate. The hospital bed there is 500, but it's overrun. Critical patients, people that have been wounded in this latest barrage, babies in incubators, they're not able to move. They're not able to go anywhere. And even if you could transport 1.1 million people out of that area, you're looking at no food or water entering Gaza, as you noted. And so the idea for these people is, where would we stay? How would we get food and water? They would prefer to stay in their own houses and die in their own homes, where at least they have some supplies, So this is the situation Gaza finds itself in this morning.
And on that, I think a lot of people are wondering, why is it that Egypt won't open the Rafah gate and allow civilians out and into Egypt? Because yes, the Israelis are moving in. They say that they have given warning to try to allow people days to leave. They say the issue is Egypt, who won't let them out. Why is it that Egypt is not allowing them to come in?
Look, Egypt has said that they are willing to open up a humanitarian corridor to bring in supplies and to take out critical patients to be treated in Egyptian hospitals. What they're not okay with doing is having the Palestinian population that lives in Gaza move into the Sinai and create a refugee camp in the Sinai for the 2.3 million people of Gaza. Now, this and Palestinians aren't keen for this either. This is because the Palestinian history is one of displacement and dispossession. Since 1948, as I said, where 3/4 of the population was forced out of their homes to make way for the creation of the state of Israel. For Palestinians hearing about this evacuation, they understand it as a permanent evacuation and a permanent displacement, no different than 1948, when 750,000 Palestinians were forced out, or 1967, when another 150,000 Palestinians were forced out of their homes during the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. So this is not a solution for Palestinians, and it's not a solution for Egypt, which is very, concerned about its own territorial sovereignty. It fought wars with Israel to get back the Sinai, and it's not willing to compromise its sovereignty to make way for a solution, what in their minds is a political solution for Israel by removing the Palestinians from Gaza.
Is there support among the civilian population in Gaza for Hamas?
It remains to be seen what the feeling is now for Hamas. Hamas was not popular before this current attack. What tends to happen when the Hamas resistance movement takes action against Israel to try to, change the calculation of Israel's control over Palestinian life in Gaza, Palestinians in general are supportive of the idea of resistance. Whether they are pleased with what's happening to them now is a different story. But the idea of resisting occupation, resisting siege and blockade is something that Palestinians have increasingly become supportive of. Why? Because negotiations, diplomacy has not worked for them in the decades after the Palestinian national movement signed an agreement with Israel towards creating a two-state solution. There have been no fruits to the diplomatic track. And so more and more resistance, and even violent resistance, is becoming something that people support. And now keep in mind, even legal means have been blocked by the international community for Palestinians to seek legal redress. Even access to the UN has been blocked, particularly by the United States. And so Palestinians who are suffering under structural violence that many legal experts describe as apartheid are fed up. They have no other means to express their displeasure with long-term, decades-long oppression. And so now resistance is becoming more popular.
Well, and I think that I hear what you're saying on resistance, and we've seen radicalization in other countries when there's marginalized populations. There's a difference between resistance and murdering children. I think this is a very different operation than we've seen in the past. But I do want to ask, just before we have to go, how much time do you think these Palestinian civilians have before the blockade starts to take a potentially devastating effect?
Well, look, just to get to your point on the issue of Palestinians and their support for resistance is one thing. Palestinians do not support, writ large, do not support attacking civilians. No, and under no circumstances. When I talk about resistance, support for resistance, I'm talking about support for confronting the structural violence that is occupation and apartheid. As for the Palestinians inside of Gaza and how much longer they can last under these circumstances, I really don't know. We're looking at either mass atrocities right now or mass ethnic cleansing. And we're watching it in real time. This is a very critical time. The international community has to ask for a ceasefire, demand a ceasefire, or we're going to see a lot more Palestinians killed.
Zaha, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Up next, the reality unfolding on the ground in the Middle East right now. Now is normally when we would do one last thing, but this week we felt that the images and interviews playing out on the ground tell the story more powerfully than a million words could. So we leave you now with the terrifying reality for Israeli and Palestinian civilians.
I'm like really in fear, and like every time I just have to have the thought of me dying in a bomb in Gaza. Like it's not a good thing. And like every place I go to run away, and I just find bombs and I find dead people, and like maybe one day I'll end up like them, but it's a really scary thing for me.
And I want to say something, it's not a war. You see the babies, the mother, the fathers in their bedrooms, in their protection rooms, and how the terrorists kill them. It's not a war. It's not a battlefield. It's a massacre. It's a terror activity. So you can look it on yourself. It's something that I never saw in my life.